15 million.
That's the Model T number.
15 million cars built between 1908 and 1927. And here's the thing about cars.
They need brakes.
They need brakes, and brakes wear out. The average Model T owner replaced their brake linings multiple times over the life of the vehicle, so we're not talking about 15 million exposure events. We're talking about tens of millions, maybe 100 million brake jobs, each one releasing clouds of asbestos dust into some mechanic's lungs.
And the companies knew this was dangerous?
By 1935, the president of the largest brake lining company in America wrote to his counterpart at Johns-Manville with a very specific piece of advice. I think the less said about asbestos, the better off we are.
Less said.
Less said. His name was Sumner Simpson, and today we're going to talk about how Simpson and his colleagues created the largest unmonitored occupational health disaster in American history, and then kept it quiet for 50 years. This is episode 12, Raybestos and the Brake Pad Revolution.
This episode is brought to you by Danziger and Dayano, 30 years of turning corporate records into family justice. Dandel.com.
Let's start with why asbestos brake linings existed at all, because they weren't just convenient, they were revolutionary.
What were they using before?
Wooden blocks pressed against steel rims.
Wooden blocks.
Worked fine below 10, 20 miles an hour, but once rubber tires came along,
The wood slipped.
then you get early drum brakes. 1902, Louis Renault builds the first mechanical drum brake, and the lining materials are not great. Cotton soaked in oil, leather, at one point camel hair.
Camel hair.
Camel hair. And all of these materials have the same problem.
Heat.
Heat. You're converting the energy of a moving vehicle into thermal energy. These materials char, they melt, they fail, and when your brakes fail at 30 miles an hour,
Which was zoom fast in 1905.
Yeah, that was very fast in 1905. So the industry has a genuine problem to solve. And then someone discovers that asbestos doesn't burn.
The perfect solution.
pretty close. Thermal stability to 450 degrees Celsius. High friction coefficient. Fire resistant. In 1906, two men in Bridgeport, Connecticut patent a woven asbestos copper wire mesh for brake linings, Arthur Raymond and Arthur Law. They named the company after the product, Raybestos. Raybestos. Raymond plus asbestos.
Subtle.
Raymond dies in 1909, 30 years old, brain abscess, not respiratory disease.
So we can't draw the H.W. Johns parallel.
We can't. Different cause of death entirely, but his partner fades from the record, and by 1916, a new man is running the show, Sumner Simpson, and Sumner Simpson will run Raybestos for the next 37 years.
Nearly 4 decades.
Long enough to build a company, long enough to build an empire, and long enough to build a cover-up. Here's the thing about the Model T. It wasn't just a car, it was a distribution system for asbestos exposure.
Go on.
Ford makes the price drop from $800 in 1908 to $310 by 1921. Suddenly, working families can afford cars. By 1929, there are 23 million vehicles on American roads.
So the same efficiency that made car ownership possible
Made asbestos exposure universal. The factory that gave American workers affordable transportation also gave them lung disease. They just didn't know it yet. Now, we should note, technical records suggest Ford initially used Raybestos transmission band linings in 1908, then switched to cotton around 1910, likely for cost or noise reasons.
The irony being?
Ford had the fireproof solution, rejected it for cheaper materials, then eventually came back to asbestos as speeds and heat demands increased.
Of course they did.
And here's where the conspiracy starts, not with what they knew, but with who they didn't count.
The mechanics.
Factory workers at Raybestos? Hundreds. Auto plant assembly workers? Thousands. Independent mechanics? Hundreds of thousands. Home mechanics changing their own brakes in the driveway? Millions.
But the mechanics weren't Raybestos employees.
They weren't covered by Raybestos workers' comp. They didn't show up in Raybestos medical surveys. They worked in independent garages, dealership service bays, their own driveways, and when they got sick,
Nobody connected it to the brake dust.
By 1975, approximately 900,000 Americans worked in brake servicing. 900,000, and not one of them appeared in a corporate health study for 50 years. Remember Frederick Hoffman from last episode? Prudential statistician, the man who documented in 1918 that insurance companies refused to cover asbestos workers.
The actuaries figured it out before the doctors did.
Bulletin number 231, Mortality from Respiratory Diseases in Dusty Trades, covers mining, textile manufacturing, the established dusty trades.
What doesn't it cover?
Brake workers, friction materials, automotive industry, garage mechanics.
Because in 1918,
The automotive industry was still in its infancy. Hoffman studied trades with documented mortality patterns. Brake mechanics were not considered asbestos workers. They weren't considered anything. They fell into a category that didn't exist yet.
so they didn't count them.
Nobody counted them. And by the time anyone thought to create that category, 50 years had passed. The gap between when British researcher E.R.A. Merriweather first identified brake work as a cause of asbestosis, early 30s, and the first successful lawsuit against a brake manufacturer, 1985, 47 years.
47 years.
An 81-year-old retired mechanic finally won a $2 million verdict, half a century after the danger was documented. Going back to July 5th, 1929, a triple merger creates Raybestos Manhattan.
What merges?
Raybestos Company, that's the Ridgeport brand, Manhattan Rubber Manufacturing from Passaic, New Jersey, rubber expertise, and U.S. Asbestos Company from Pennsylvania. Vertical integration. They control the supply chain from asbestos yarn to finished brake shoe.
And Simpson runs it.
Simpson runs it. And on October 1st, 1935, Simpson writes to Vandiver Brown, an attorney at Johns-Manville, quoting, "I think the less said about asbestos, the better off we are."
That's the quote.
Brown's reply is almost more damning. He calls it their ostrich-like attitude. He knows they're burying their heads in the sand. He's documenting that he knows, and he keeps doing it anyway.
So this isn't negligence.
This is coordination. Simpson at Raybestos, Brown at Johns-Manville, competitors agreeing to keep everyone else in the dark, and it works. Same playbook Hoffman documented in 1918, but now they're not just avoiding workers, they're manipulating the science.
Manipulating how?
Dr. Anthony Lanza, Metropolitan Life. He studies asbestos workers, finds 87% with 15-plus years exposure have lung disease. Original conclusion: it is possible for uncomplicated asbestosis to result fatally. But the published version, 1936, asbestosis was milder than silicosis. Science for sale. And then they went after the trade press.
The what?
1939. The editor of Asbestos magazine, yes, there was a magazine called Asbestos, writes to Sumner Simpson, "We understand that all this information on asbestos is to be kept confidential." They weren't just suppressing research, they were suppressing trade journalism.
Speaking of documents that were buried for decades, Danziger and Diano has spent 30 years finding the paperwork companies thought they'd buried, the internal memos, the correspondence, the truth. Dandel.com.
Sumner Simpson runs Raybestos from 1916 to 1948. Chairman until his death in 1953, 37 years.
And then?
His son, William Simpson, born 1916, spent his entire career at Raybestos Manhattan, general manager by 1947, president and CEO from 1967 to 1980, chairman until 1983.
2 generations.
2 generations presiding over manufacture, cover-up, and eventual exposure. And here's the detail that matters. Pre-1969, about 6,000 documents sit in the company vault. Combination lock access. Only Sumner Simpson, William Simpson, 2 secretaries and security guards have the combination.
And when Sumner dies?
The box stays in the vault. 1969, William moves the box to his personal office closet.
His office closet.
For 5 years, he keeps his father's correspondence in his closet. Then in 1974, he gives the box to John Marsh, the Director of Environmental Affairs. And between 1974 and 1977, Marsh tells William these papers are relevant to asbestos disease.
And William keeps them for 3 more years.
Until the subpoena, 1977, New Jersey asbestos litigation. Papers produced.
What was he thinking for those 3 years?
We don't know. We don't know if he read the letters. We don't know if he understood what the less said the better meant for the hundreds of thousands of mechanics who'd been exposed. What we know is he kept the box, and when the lawyers came asking, he gave it to them.
That was nice of him.
Yeah. Stratford, Connecticut, 1919. Raybestos establishes a facility at 75 East Main Street. 34 acres. Decades of manufacturing asbestos brake linings.
What happened to the waste?
Community service.
Community service?
Raybestos made a generous gift to the town. Dried asbestos waste, given away as free fill material. Used for lawns, driveways, playgrounds, schoolyards. At least 46 residential properties received contaminated fill. Over 24 commercial and municipal properties. Short Beach Park, 270,000 cubic yards of contaminated material. The town built sports fields on it in 1981.
Sports fields?
Raybestos Memorial Ball Field, named after the company, was one of the most contaminated sites.
And the children?
In between 1958 and 1991, Stratford had the highest rates of mesothelioma and bladder cancer in Connecticut. And here's the data point that stops you cold. Mesothelioma rates were particularly high for individuals under the age of 25.
Under 25, damn.
You have to understand, mesothelioma almost never appears in young people. The latency period is typically 20 to 50 years. So when you see elevated rates in people under 25,
They were exposed as young children.
playing on playgrounds, running on ball fields, in schoolyards that the company had helpfully paved with its own industrial waste. April 1995, EPA adds the site to Superfund. Over 100,000 cubic yards of contamination removed as of 2024. $113 million allocated from Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. Cleanup is ongoing.
All these years later, mind-boggling and infuriating.
The conspiracy doesn't start with what they knew. It starts with who they didn't count.
The mechanics weren't Raybestos employees.
So Raybestos didn't count them.
The home mechanics weren't anyone's employees.
So nobody counted them.
The children weren't workers at all.
And children never count. Not until they get sick. Not until they die. Not until someone finally asks, where did this come from? By 1929, there were 23 million vehicles on American roads. Every single one of them needed brakes. And behind every brake job was a cloud of dust that nobody was measuring, nobody was monitoring, and nobody was counting.
Until the lawsuits.
Until the lawsuits, 50 years later. But brake pads were just one vector. Next time, we're going to talk about what happened when asbestos stopped being an industrial material and became a consumer product. Building materials, household items, things you could buy at the hardware store and install in your own home.
The magic mineral goes mainstream.
The magic mineral goes mainstream, and the body count goes with it.
We've been talking about who didn't get counted. The mechanics, the home mechanics, the children.
There's another category, the families.
Michelle was 4 years old when she started breathing asbestos from her father's work clothes. Every evening, she helped him get out of his gear. At 10, they gave her 3 to 6 months to live.
She survived 35 years, raised a son, adopted 4 children, and counseled 200 families facing what she faced.
Her story and 4 others like it are in the book Beating the Odds, Surviving Mesothelioma, available on Amazon.
The families in that book worked with Danziger and Dayano.
dandell.com. That's DANDELL.com.
Next week, Episode 13, The Magic Mineral Goes Mainstream. Okay, that one sat with me.
You need a minute?
I need like 3 minutes and possibly a drink.
It's 10 a.m.
It's 10 a.m. and I just spent an hour talking about children on playgrounds. I think the universe owes me a bourbon.
Fair. You know what got me? The ball field.
The name.
Raybestos Memorial Ball Field. They named it after the company, like a gift to the community, like they were proud.
They probably were proud. That's the thing. In the moment, it probably felt generous. Hey, the company's giving away free film material. They're sponsoring the ball field.
And 30 years later, their kids have mesothelioma.
Under 25. That number, I keep coming back to it.
Because it shouldn't exist.
It shouldn't exist. 20 to 50 year latency. You don't get mesothelioma in your 20s unless you were exposed really young, probably playing in it.
I keep thinking about the parents. You take your kid to Little League, you're being a good parent, and the whole time...
You couldn't have known.
But someone knew.
Someone always knew. That's the whole series.
The less said about asbestos, the better off we are.
The Simpson family motto.
Father to son, 37 years to, what was it, another 20 for William?
60 years of Simpsons and a box in a closet.
The box in the closet, his personal office closet, 5 years.
And his environmental affairs guy tells him it's relevant.
And he just keeps it. 3 more years.
I don't know if that's arrogance or denial or just inertia.
Maybe all 3. Maybe you inherit a cover-up and you just keep covering.
Because uncovering means admitting what your father did.
And what you've been doing.
Yeah,
You okay?
I'm fine. Some episodes are heavier than others.
This one had kids.
This one had kids.
You want to get lunch after this? There's that new Thai place.
The one with the green curry?
The one with the green curry.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. Let's go think about something else for an hour.
And then come back and do it again next week?
Consumer products.
Hair dryers and Christmas decorations.
Can't wait.
Maybe it's not too early for that drink after all.